So here we go. So we'll start with, we've got our figures. Now first off, we're going to clean them up. So as figures are obviously cast, they tend to come away with a bit of mold lines, and especially mold flash. This is especially pronounced on metal figures. So if we take a closer look at this guy, you'll notice, oh come on, focus for me will you, buddy? You'll notice that area between the legs, there's a ugly bit of metal, which isn't quite, well, which we have to remove. There's some slight mold lines running down the leg, and we've also got, on the base here, we want to flatten this out a bit. So, let's get started. Why do I turn on autofocus when it clearly does not work? So I'll just try and work without disrupting the camera. I'll just get a file and do the stuff which is less risky. So just flatten off the base nicely. And then, what we're aiming to do is just only drag the file one way. Just take off the mold line. You don't want to accidentally destroy detail. So that should, for the most part, deal with the mold lines on the back. And you'll notice, like on the helmet, it's a bit pronounced. So we'll just get the file in there and just gently try and scrape away some of that tabbing. And just gently try and remove some from the top. Now, if it does end up producing a bit of a soft pattern, we can progressively file it down more with an even finer file. In this case, this is normally for plastic, but I find it actually does a great job of buffing metal. So just go a bit like that, and it generally removes any rough scratching left over from, using a metal file. I find this works particularly well for you start with one coarseness, then get down to the less coarse option. So I'm just going to quickly finish this guy up. Unfortunately it's stuck, so all we can really do is poke this mold line particular bit of flash out. So we'll just, can't really see it, but work it in between the legs. And mostly just drag the file out. And there, we've cleaned up our miniature more or less. So let's move on. Now what I'd do normally is I'd mount them on a bit of I'd mount 5 or so miniatures on a paddle pop stick. I'll show some images right now. Yeah, and the idea of this is so you can work on them progressively and not just it achieves an economy of space when working on these miniatures. Anyway, I'll get rid of the images and I'll show you how I'm going to mount them for this project. I'm just going to do them as I would a 28mm base miniature, because honestly I'm just doing these basically to show you how I go about doing 15mm. So just my usual cork and washer setup with a bit of blue tack to hold them on there. So yeah, he's ready to go. Anyway, so let's continue. So here we have our undercoated figures. For these guys I typically follow, I didn't do that guy properly, a 2-stage undercoat process where first of all, again I didn't do that properly but should make too much of a difference. I do a black undercoat initially. Now I aim to do this, I shoot this undercoat up into all of the undersides of the figures, just to make sure we've got an even coverage of the entire figure and covering all the metal. And then I do, the color of course is black, then I do a 45-degree zenithal down to get all the raised surfaces. So the idea of this is you start to get a feel for a more graduated look as to where all the color and your highlights should suit. Now this does help a bit if you keep your paint thin enough, but I usually don't. So yeah, that's pretty much the process for getting a highlight done. So I am going to start picking up my colours and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so you might have noticed that the audio quality has lifted slightly. That's because I busted out my proper microphone after, well, just not having the willpower to get it set up. Anyway, so I have gone through, done some research and picked out my colours. So yeah, basically I'm basing them all off the colours that are pretty much specified in the source books for the Flames of War series of games. So the older series used to give their colours in both Games Workshop and Vallejo, but the newer ones use their bespoke Battlefront paint range, so you'll need to download a colour conversion chart if you want to convert them into your favourite colour range. But anyway, I'm going to stick with VMC because, well, I have a lot of it that is probably going to last me for the rest of my life for the most part. Anyway, so to start with, we're going to aim for the base coats. So yep, these will generally take only 1 or 2 layers to be fully complete, or depending on the colour, of course. So yeah, it's going on quite nicely, and you can see that the undercoat is already helping with the vibrancy of the colour. So you just have to yeah, just get it done. Should do it where you can actually see me. So this stage is pretty much just base coating. Absolutely no real skill here for the initial part. I'm just going to start with the largest surface area and work my way down. And in this case, it's obviously the uniform. There we go. So just work it into the cracks in between the kit bits on the web kit. Make sure I've hit the undersides, and yeah. Now that's only one coat, and it's already pretty much done. But I'll go back over it for a second one in a bit. And we'll do the tank crewman next. So here's a one-piece jumpsuit type arrangement, which means I can, and also no webbing, no belt kit or webbing, so which means that I don't have to be pretty minimal with these, with the colours I apply. Yeah, generally when painting, the fewer colours you have on a model, the fewer steps you have to take to like shade and highlight all of them, which often translates to the less time you take. So that's the reason why I'm very reluctant to attack large armies with camo patterns, simply because of that necessity. Okay. And we're just about done. Yeah, generally Vallejo model color is a very, very highly pigmented paint, so you'll get a solid color for the most part after only 1 or 2 coats. However, their reds are not as good as some of the other colors and have a tendency to, unless you shake them up properly and just be careful in applying them, they tend to not cover well, or at all at times. Anyway, the British infantryman in Italy, his colour scheme's different because historically they had English uniform, well, you know, the standard battle dress brown uniform jacket for the trousers, but had retained the khaki shirt from the North Africa campaign. I do believe this was the case in Tunisia as well. Feel free to correct me on that if you care. So yeah, only doing the trousers at not this part. Just getting the colour on, and we're done. So we'll move on to the Germans. Don't mention the war. Where So I've got either German uniform or German field grey. Now, German field grey was the colour that my copy of the, I believe it was the Late War book, translated to. So we'll try using that and see how we go. It's an old paint, so it's a bit not in a great state right now. But yeah, it's good enough. Okay, so we just need to get some water on our palette. Remix the clumps of pigment as best we can. And then get started. So yeah, like with the British models, we chuck on the colour pretty liberally, working our way into the deepest recesses, simply because this is the base colour for every other element on the model. That looks pretty good. Alright, well, no it doesn't. It's just... it's in progress. So yeah, you can imagine the tedium of doing all of this by hand, so I would recommend an airbrush if you've got one. Just basically attach them to your popsicles, not popsicle, paddle pop sticks. What am I, an American? Attach them to your paddle pop sticks and just line them up and give them a coat. I must admit, for my Soviets, I had a hard time doing that due to the brush nozzle clogging, because it does have trouble with a lot of the more like shooting more heavily pigmented paint through the airbrush can be difficult. So you have to be generous with your thinning in order for that to be effective. Anyway. Sorry if I wander off camera. I'm kind of focusing on what's right in front of me rather than what's on the monitor. I'm just working it in gently. I'm not going to worry too much about spreading over onto other components, because we're going to hit all of those with another layer of colour anyway. There we go, we're just about done. What colour was it? Ah, I think I missed a colour. The Germans, their helmets were German grey. Just add that to the paint repository. So, final colour, we have our the shirt on this guy, which was khaki. So, we've got it here, khaki. Ooh, excuse me. Just again on the palette and just layer it on. Now be careful with, I should be going a lot thinner than this, but I'm not particularly worried about washing out too much detail, because the detail is pretty sharp on metal miniatures. But yeah, this is a case of do as I say, not as I do. You should be thinning out your paint a lot more than I am. Anyway. So yeah, I think that's pretty much done for the main uniform jacket colours. So let's go back and look at our two initial fellas. You can almost leave... yeah. You know, let's aim for the speed painting. So you'll notice there is some potential discoloration between some of the higher up areas and the inner recesses, where the black is a lot more pronounced. And there's a spot I missed, so let's quickly just zap that. And that's good. So that should have... while I was talking, watching paint dry, we're more or less good to go. So we'll put the Germans to one side and work on the British. So to start with the late war British, we'll check my handy colour guide and The web kit is green-grey, which is this colour. Very convenient. And he's not in a great state. The problem with the Vallejo paints is that they can tend to colour separate after a very, very long while. So I'm just getting my shake on. And put some on the palette. So we'll get out a very fine tip, which that's not a great idea. Let's get a crap brush. It's another 2. How are you? I classify you as fair. So yeah, what I will do is I'll get some really, really nasty brushes. These are Modfix brushes. They're available from, well, in case you haven't figured it out yet, I'm an Australian, and one of the biggest online retailers in country has their own brand of hobby gear. Some of their dry brushes are good, but these synthetics are pretty terrible. Unless you're doing messy jobs like, say, base coating. Excuse me. So yeah, just added a bit of water. That's done. Let's get some paint on the model. So, on the tank crewman, the parts which we need to paint are the belt and the puttees on his boots. So we'll just carefully put in a layer on the belt. It's also got a little holster there, so we'll paint that as well. For his little tiny Webley, or Smith & Wesson revolver. I'm not sure what the majority was at the time. But yeah, just make sure we put a thin layer of the green-grey on the belt kit. So yeah, I'm sure at this point you can appreciate how painting perhaps over 100 of these guys in succession can get a bit grating on the nerves. So definitely wouldn't recommend this if you're not a patient painter. Lots of fiddly detail and you have to spend a lot of time doing it. There. Now, if the paint didn't go on properly, I would give this guy another coat, but it's actually in a pretty good state, so let's just move on with our lives. So, just do a... Actually, I do believe the gas mask case was a different colour on these guys. I'm just going to check colours once I'm done with this. Also, I personally sometimes have a hard time determining what parts are like uniform and what parts are belt kits. So, also don't forget the weapon slings as well. Those are often made of the same material as the belt kit. So just give it a little layer like that. Actually, now that I look at it, he's got a backpack with a folded bit of material in the end. Well, in the flap, really, which is, from what I saw in the books, was a different colour. Looks like a belt kit part somehow. Okay, it's not going to matter too much. So, oh yep, don't forget the puttees. And there we go. I'm just going to quickly check my source book for this.
Alright, it seems that they've got the same colour for the entire thing. So, but it looks like that little flap of material is the same colour as the uniform, so what we'll do is we'll just pick up some more of that English uniform, and it's not completely dry, but we'll just quickly zap it in there, like so. And we're done. Now, I do believe the belt kit colour was different for the Italian theatre chap. So, if I check my reference which I prepared earlier, stone grey. So a lot paler. Holdover from the there we go. Holdover from the desert campaign, where obviously, while the desert isn't particularly green. There we go. It's a bit on the palette, and same deal. This time I think I'll start at the putties. Work my way up. So to be a bit careful here, because this is the part where we're starting to get to detail, which is hard to reach due to the cast of the figure. Actually, I think the bayonet case might have been a different colour, but I'm not sure. I'll deal with that later. So yeah, it looks like this is that stone grey is one of those colours that is going to take a couple of layers to fully get right. It's going on very thin, and when it goes over the black, it doesn't fully cover it. Okay, now I'll make sure I just get the backpack straps as well. There we go. So, an interesting thing is that paint can be touch dry once you finish a layer. Simply start from the earliest parts you painted. Like the putties, by the looks of them, mostly dry at this point. So just quickly add a bit of dollop of paint just to reinforce the colour. Do the same thing with the belt kit, mostly on the top because since the paint is mostly liquid, the excess pigment would be flowing into the recesses, whereas the upper surfaces wouldn't have retained as much. This is why the whole zenithal priming tends to be useful, I find, because the paint on paint on a black undercoat tends to make a very intense colour, while paint on a white undercoat tends to make it very washed out. So you can get a lot of free highlighting, basically. Well, it's very subtle though, so definitely wouldn't rely on it entirely unless you're specifically adapting your painting method around it. So yeah, how long has this been going for? 24 minutes. I'm gonna have to cut this down. So, I do believe the belt kit was on German Grenadiers, was black. There we go. So this basically involves like just since the black on the Vallejo model color range is a very, very strong color, so it'll this I guarantee you for most things you'll only need one layer for this. So just make sure you tap everything and it pretty much turns black. There we go. And while we're here, let's also do the boots as well. No wait, the boots were brown. That's a mistake. Just a quick tip for undoing mistakes. Now, until it sets, the Vallejo paint is very, very, you can wash it off. It'll just basically deteriorate into a very thick wash. So I normally wouldn't, but I just don't want to lose too much of my zenithal prime at this stage. That'll do. I might also just quickly repaint the leg where I got some oversplash from the wash. Okay. So, the bread bag was a certain colour. I'll need to do some more research on that. Anyway, let's grab our black again. And at this point, now that it's basically in a morass of webbing, I'm just going to run a thin line of black along the point where I feel the belt should be. It's very hard to tell. Alright. Black needs a bit more water on the palette. There we go. Just like so. And we've done the shoulder straps on the front side, so we're just about we're done. Anyway, now on Grenadier 1-3, no, not 12, 2. I don't even know if that's correct. I'll just paint his pistol holster. As well as the webbing as usual. Now, it's mostly obscured by his arm, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Just tap a little bit of black under his arm, and then hit the area roughly where the belt should go. And there's not a lot of it, because it's covered with oodles of equipment. And there, pretty much done. Since I like to be efficient as possible with base coating, what I'll do is then immediately move on to paint up all of the black components on the other models in this case, which is the British, that's a mistake. So what I'll do is I'll wait for that to dry and reapply it, because that's too small to effectively wash out. And I did it again, getting sloppy. And I'm also running out of black. There we go. So I'll put him to one side, just so I know that I'll have to go back to him. And let's do the other boots. Do I paint the putties on this? Yeah, they're just a bit, the colour's a bit more muted so it doesn't stand out as much. And what I should be doing is black-grey and just using a wash. I really should do that, because that's what I did on my Soviet Cold War guys, is they had very, very big black tall boots, and I didn't feel like shading them, so I just basically painted them black-grey, which is a very, 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 well, relatively light shade of grey, a relatively dark shade of grey, rather, and just washed it with my wash colour and left it as is to provide shading to the boots. I didn't care that much to highlight light because there are more important areas to highlight, quite frankly. And I felt as if I could get away with avoiding the boots. So yeah. Anyway, the rest of this is going to be me base coating a model. I'll turn the camera back on when I've got something more interesting to show. I skipped ahead and finish off the basic base coats on all of the miniatures. So as you can see, we've got all the base colours down, no real issues there, and we're getting ready for the wash stage. However, actually I made a mistake. What I probably shouldn't have done is I shouldn't have done the flesh during this stage, because we are going to be washing that a separate colour from the initial wash, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But before that, you may notice that we currently have not painted the metallics yet on any of the features. This is because we're going to do that now. This is a personal preference of mine on how to do metallics, especially for more modern and or realistic looking figures, is that they're not meant to be bright and shiny. They're meant to be very, very muted, because, you know, real militaries tend to use like black carbon steel to make sure their weapon, like the metallic features on weapons, don't glint. And where's my black? I'm holding it. Yeah, this is gonna make an interesting video. So yeah, to get this to my usual mix is 1 part gunmetal grey and 1 part black, or rather I just mix them up until I like the composition. So let's go ahead and do that. Just pop a little bit on my palette. Pop a bit on my palette and then get the mixing brush. So as usual, a fairly crappy brush, which I don't mind abusing with this sort of treatment. Just get our initial mix. Okay, looking good. So, though a slight difference, I am going to paint the exposed bayonet pure gunmetal grey. So I'll do that after I've finished everything else. Because you do this because obviously, if you look at like pictures of equipment of that period, then the bayonets and bladed weapons tended to be just as, well, shiny as regular, as carbonized metal. Anyway, whatever the term is, I don't actually know much about metal anyway, or metalworking. So let's just quickly... Yep, in the case of bolt action rifles, you should, if you're into this sort of subject matter, you should know where to paint everything. In this case, it's the bolt assembly and the bolt handle. Parts of the trigger and the magazine. I think there's a barrel band about there, so I'll do a quick line. Like that. And now let's find the trigger and just gently get some around the edge. That's our metallics done. Actually, while I'm here, I just noticed I haven't done the wooden handle on the entrenching tool, so I'll quickly do that. Unfortunately, I have some of my beige brown for wood already on the palette. There we go. Good looking. So yeah, that's more or less all the features on the miniature, covered up all of the undercoat. So yeah. Now, this guy has a lot more. Does he have an entrenching tool? No, not visible at least. So, and of course, since this is an MG34, all of the metallic features are a lot more concentrated, and you don't have to paint them in as precisely, so just give the entire gun a bit of a coat, apart from the pistol grip and the buttstock, which I've already painted in my standard wood colour. Let's make sure we get this on camera. There we go. just carefully working it in, trying really hard at this point not to cross-contaminate and go over onto the other colours we already painted. So that's just about it. So moving right along, watching our tank crewman here is very simple because he only has his revolver, which was all metal anyway. Well, depending on the revolver, but for the most part it was all metal. So all we need to do is just give it a general base coat and we'll call it done. Not sure what the grips on the service revolvers were, if they were metal or I think they were Bakelite of some kind, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. This is only meant to be a demonstration miniature anyway. Okay, so that's the revolver painted in. Now, Leanne Fields are interesting because we have a bolt assembly up the back, which goes a fair way up. Get the bolt as well. Then there's a barrel banding about there in the middle. And then virtually this entire forward assembly, including the foresight, is metal. And of course there's a magazine and trigger guard, which is mostly obscured at this point. And we'll call that done. Finally, this guy has a Lee Enfield as well, so we'll paint it. Just overloading the metal a bit there. So that will be the magazine right in there. The handle on the crossguard and the pommel on the bayonet. Of course, we'll do the forward muzzle of the Lee Enfield. That's looking good. Now the barrel banding is slightly visible, so we'll just give it a very small bit of work. And on that side as well. Now, it looks like the majority of the bolt assembly is hidden to us, so we'll just leave it be. And that's more or less the miniature. Now finally, we'll get our gunmetal. Put a bit on the palette. Sorry, gone a little British there. And then just get some on my brush. And then just paint the bayonet. I didn't do that side of the bayonet's cross guards, so we'll just quickly sketch that in and then we can call it done. Lovely. Okay, so those are all of the base colours down for the miniatures. So as you can no doubt surmise, this takes a considerable amount of time to paint when you're painting an entire army of these guys. So an army at this scale is a commitment, so think about that before making the splash, I reckon. Anyway, now I usually let my metallics dry for about usually a couple of hours, because they have a tendency to if you immediately apply a wash, they tend to run, and the metallic, like the mica flicks tend to pieces tend to run onto other colors, and it's not great. So for doing these guys, I typically apply a wash in 2 layers. In this case, I'll be doing an overall wash of Agrex Earthshade first. Then what I'll have to do is repaint the flesh once that layer of wash is dry. Then I'll give specifically the flesh a layer of Reikland Flesh Shade. Alright, so yeah, that's pretty much it for this part, and we'll move right along. Okay, so moving right along, what we'll do is we'll get some shade on the model now that they've all dried thoroughly. So to start with, we'll put our Agrax Earth Shade layer on. So I'm just going to be a bit aggressive with it. Just make sure it's well slathered. And once it's down, we'll clean off the brush and then start picking it back up again. The idea of this is just to make sure it's all worked in, but make sure it doesn't pool as well. That's the important thing, because if it pools, it'll look terrible. So that's pretty good. Just have to keep doing this with all of our models. So just tack it like so. And then, yeah, just repeat. Now, the colours don't really matter, but for the most part, because brown is pretty much the universal donor for shading, especially for more realistic-looking miniatures. This won't necessarily apply to other fantasy ranges, for example. There we go. There we go. Alright, it's some easy shading done. So I'm just going to quickly tab off a lot of the excess. Then make sure we get the underside. And then I'll just do a quick inspection to make sure there's no pooling. Reinforce the shade a little bit. Cool. So that is, yeah. Now, what I'll do, I'll let that dry overnight. I'll pick it up tomorrow by relayering the flesh on the face and hands, and then redoing the shade with Reikland Flesh Shade. So, off camera, I've gone ahead and repainted all of the flesh colours with the baseline level of flesh to get rid of the wash that we put down over the entire miniature. So what we're going to do now is just put on a very small amount of Reikland Flesh Shade to the flesh. Oh, this thing just cannot stay open. And then that'll be all of our washing for these figures done. So just don't worry too much about overspill, because it's very hard to tell at this scale if things go too wrong. Obviously don't slather it. If you make a mess, just clean it up, like just wipe a little bit away with your finger. But yeah, It's relatively easy. Anyway, it's a little bit too much. There we go. Just soak up some of the excess. And we're laughing. So yeah. Looking good. Sorry, I should actually do it on camera where you can see it. Okay. Alright. So that's just about good. I'm going to leave these guys to dry for about an hour, and I'll come back and do the intermediate relayering. Okay, so the washes are fully dry, and we are ready to proceed with our layering. So, the stage is relatively simple. You just take the mini and find English uniform, in this case. And the goal here is color separated a bit, but to re-establish our original base coat just a little bit. So remember to make sure it's in frame, and then yeah. So you'll notice how I'm just gently hitting the areas that I'm generally more exposed and more raised. There we go. Now the effect is relatively subtle, but it'll pay off once the highlighting kicks in. Be careful, try not to don't let any of this paint run into the deeper recesses, because that'll ruin your shading. Oh, should go without saying, really. This stage is also relatively quick to accomplish. So there you go. It's a relatively straightforward and quick process. So that's all the English uniform done. Now we'll bust out our German field grey, wherever it is. There's Russian uniform. Come on. There it is, German field grey, World War II. Just get a bit on the palette. You know, you don't need a lot. You need to, this layer should be particularly thin, just to, you want to get an even coating, a very thin coating. You want it to blend into the shaded colour, so you don't want it to overpower your the shaded colour rather. Just, yep, generally hit the raised folds and stuff like that as well. This will get another layer when it comes to highlighting, but yeah, it just starts to help define the shape and get that transition from shade, highlight, shade base to highlight. And a little bit in there where there's some folds and creases that look a bit pronounced. Just gently run it down there. Yeah, you can already see that's looking quite pronounced now, which is good. And just along the arm, and gently paint along. There we go. Yeah, that was a bit of a mistake. I got some of the base color on his flesh, but I caught it early, so it didn't have time to fully cure, well, even start to cure, and just wiped the excess away. So yeah, if you're on the ball, you can catch things like that. Okay. So you can already see we're starting to restore our base colors, which is good. So yeah, unfortunately, this is a fairly, not going to say laborious, not as much as base coating, but samey task. Oh, excuse me. So I might just stop the camera, and I'll get back to you once I'm ready for highlighting. Alright, so the highlighting on the uniforms and equipment is mostly done. I've just got 2 more colours to go, and these are generally exceptions to the existing rules. First off, we're going to highlight with highlight flesh, then as I mentioned a couple of times now, we're going to do spot highlights with gunmetal grey for the metal. So let's start with the flesh, because the last thing we want to do in the process is contaminate our water with metal flakes. Well, we've already done it, but you know, it's not too bad. Ugh, if I can handle my brush. So just, again, thin down quite considerably. Now, just so you can see what I'm doing, you want to try and emphasize the nose, the cheeks, and the chin, just to try and define the shape of the face. Because realistically, for this level of detail, that's all you can really do, is define just the suggestion of a face. So, let me get some more. And then once that's done, just try and sketch in where the fingers and thumbs should go. So there, along there, and a couple on the underside, and for the one holding the rifle, just paint lines down like that. Try to get them on the actual sculpt molded parts, and hit the thumb. There we go. That's the flesh highlight for one gentleman. So again, repeat the process. This can be pretty quick once you get the hang of it. in the fingers. That's that done. Now for this guy, he has a bit of exposed forearm, arm and elbow. So, like with highlighting the uniform earlier, I'm just going to do a couple of spot highlights to emphasize corners. So there, on his elbow, on his wrist, and then sketch in the fingers on both hands. Now, don't really, just put a slight line along there, just to emphasize height. Then we'll put in the cheekbones and the chin, and we're done. I'm running out of flesh highlight, so we should bring this to a close. So I'm not going to bother to highlight the helmet strap, it's probably too much effort at this stage. Since he's got his fingers sort of like scrunched up, I'm just going to highlight a few of the edges, and here we're going to sketch in the fingers, so along like that. And we're done. Finally, for our tank crewman, we will just put a few highlights in the usual spots. Fingers. And on the other side. Okay, so that's done. Way too easy. Now we'll get our, where do I put it? Gunmetal. Get a oh, we've already got a bit on the palette, so never mind. Let's see if I can thin that down a bit. Yes, I can. So, just take a little bit and put it on the very top of the sights and the bolt assembly. And also, I forgot to mention, this guy's a shovel. We'll just paint the rim of the shovel. So yeah, that just emphasizes the little bit of metallic shimmer without actually killing our darkened metal effect. So same thing for this service revolver. And the MG34. Let's try and get all the parts which are somewhat angled and edged. Excellent. Perfect. Now this guy's a little different because he's got not only rifle furniture to paint, but a bayonet as well. So I'll just quickly do the rifle parts. And for the bayonet, we'll just give it a highlight, working our way from top to bottom on both sides. And that should catch enough. Good. And this guy's gonna be way too easy. And we're done. That's pretty much the figures are now basically painted. So I was going to leave this tutorial there, but I think I'm going to take it a little further and demonstrate how I go about basing. So to start with, I salvaged from a box set I'm not going to use anymore these series of bases, and what I'll do is I'll demonstrate the process of how to fix them to the base and my usual basing method. I'll catch you in a bit once I've cleared away some of this. So I had a revelation that the old style of metal miniatures don't necessarily slot into the new style bases without a lot of prep work, and I don't want to do that right now, so I'm just gonna glue them freely on these old style bases. So we will just get some just super glue, chuck it on the base, and then go for it. And these two can go together because they're similar enough to be reasonable for it to be reasonable for them to be together. Now the crewman can go on his own. So can the Italian campaign rifleman and the European theatre rifleman. And we'll pretty much wait for those to dry. So, I'm going to do... I don't actually normally do this, but this may be essential at this point. Now, I'm going to get some dark earth from Vallejo. Now this is basically... it's like spackle, pre-made. And I want to be extremely careful here, because if it goes everywhere it'll make a mess, and I don't want that, especially on my newly painted miniatures. I'm going to just get a little dollop on my tool here, find my miniature, and then going to gently sort of tease it in. Try and hide the fact that there are these great big metal bases that these guys are standing on. Too much. Too much. See, it's very, very fiddly work, and a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily want to flow off your application tool, whatever it may be, easily. So you just have to be patient with it. Okay, so you can already see we're getting results. I'm just going to wipe off some of the excess around the lip of the base, and then use my tool just to break up the shape a bit. Okay, looking good. Just be careful not to touch the miniatures at this point, because your hands will, if you're following along at home, your hands will be covered with the stuff, and you don't want to ruin your paintwork, so just be careful at this stage. Okay, I got a little bit on his boot, but that's fine. We will probably end up splashing his boots, the miniature's boots a bit when we get to actually painting the base, so we haven't done too much harm yet. So now we'll just quickly scrape off the excess, and then using this tool quickly with the end that isn't wet, just disrupt some of the features, and then we're done. So this will take a while to dry, so we'll leave it be for now. I'll just quickly complete the rest of these guys, then come back to you once I'm ready to continue the basing process. Alright, so I have to go out in a minute, and I think these things are dry enough, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to proceed with my basing process as usual. So I'm going to basically give the entire thing a fairly even but thin coat of PVA glue, and that's wood glue if you're anyone else. And I'm going to use a little bit of, get a bit of paper towel, dry brush to just clean up some of the excess, especially around the boots. Then I'm just going to wipe it off the edges, and then we're going to stick this entire thing in some sand. Again, clear it off around the edges where we've got a bit too much, and there's our based miniature. Now, I was going to put some tiny little rocks on there, but yeah, let's do that. So what I should have done is get my rocks, get a pair of tweezers to pick up said tiny little rock. Oh, damn it. Dip it in the PVA, and then slop it on the base. And same thing as before, find another good chunk of rock, PVA, and base. Now normally I wait for these to thoroughly dry before I proceed with the sand application, but honestly I don't have the patience at this point. This has been a long video to make. So, put a bit of glue on our rock. Then on the model. Come on. There we go. Get off. Get off. There. It'll do. This probably won't survive long enough, or won't survive the sand application process. But oh well. It's a bit too much white glue, so I might just throw that one off. Anyway, so next up we will start with this guy, get back to applying white glue all over. There we go. That's another one. We've got this guy here. Finally, the tank crewman. That's pretty much the basing process. So these guys will probably take at least a day to cure fully, so I won't be able to finish this job for another day, which is fortunate because it's about afternoon and I have stuff to do, so I'll catch you later when I'm ready to paint the bases. Alright, so we are on the home stretch at last. I've decided I've let these guys dry for long enough, so I'm going to get to work on the base colours. So, again, we need to work first on a sort of undercolour, and for that I typically use German camo black brown. I hope if I took off the brush shroud, I guess. So, the idea of this is to really make sure it's soaked up by the basing material. You want it to basically be our base colour. All of our other base colours will act off this colour. So yeah, it's pretty simple. You just layer it on, make sure it's thick enough to go on. And more or less the sand should soak most of it up. There we go. So basically just aiming for a pretty much full coverage. It's rapidly running out. And you know what? We got these out for a reason. So I could do this without having to fondle the miniature at weird angles. Okay, so we shall proceed. Now with hopefully easier to see the details of what's going on. And just lay down the colour. So just generally work it close to the boots, but try to avoid going over. It doesn't matter if you do it too much, just be careful. Now don't worry about overpainting the rocks as well. We'll come back to those and do them their own colour later on. Perfect. Excellent. Unfortunately, this stage, like the PVA stage, takes a very long time to dry, so odds are I'll have to leave this one overnight. Actually, you know what? I'm going to try something. I'll show you in a minute once I'm done with these base coats. Because the thing is, I want to get this done so I can move on to other projects, because currently I've got the camera rig set up on my desk, and I can't really change projects without disrupting that, so yeah, just kind of itching to move on with my life and hobby projects. Okay. There. Okay. So, what I am going to do is go to my ottoman. That's where I store a lot of extraneous hardware, which I don't need access to all the time. Fish around inside of it. And there it is. Retrieve this guy. So, the idea of this is, on high, you blast... Sorry. You just keep on blasting the miniature with hot air until he dries. So, I will stop recording and see how it goes. Alright, so, we're getting towards the end game here. We've got everything mostly dry. And now we can pretty much sail through to completion. So first of all, I'm going to apply the mid-tone of the base, which is Vallejo Model Color Flat Earth. You want to overbrush, basically, like not quite a dry brush, not quite a wet brush. And we'll use the largest possible brush we can get away with. Granted, this is harder when you've got a lot more miniatures to the base. So you just be fairly aggressive and just start layering the brown over. Again, we want to leave the deepest recesses, our original camo black brown, and get the majority of the colour to be this flat earth colour. It'll give us some depth to the ground. And be careful as you go in towards the feet. But if you do make a mistake, what you do is you just get a fairly stiff brush and then a bit of water on it, and then you can scrub away any paint that got on. That's pretty much it. So repeat as necessary for our other bases. Now, always be careful not to have too much paint on your brush, otherwise you'll leave an ugly smear for your first brush stroke, and it looks horrible. But if you do make a mistake, don't worry about it. You can just put some camo black brown over that section to clean it up, and try again once it's all dry. But since this is a tedious task, hopefully you won't make this mistake initially, so you'll only have to do it once. I've wanted to do this more often than I'd like with my Soviets, which was annoying. Sorry. There we go. Now generally, it's best to try and use a large flat brush for this sort of work rather than a usual style brush, due to trying to, disperse the paint over a larger area. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the situation might not allow it, especially if you've got lots of models clustered on a base. Anyway, there we go. Almost out of our earth colour. So you notice I'm not thinning it, which is fine because we don't want it to run in the cracks. We want it to only remain on top. Well, there goes my dishwasher. Oh, that's a little too much there. It's no big deal. Okay, I think we're approaching done. So, I'll throw that one in the rinse water and find a suitable dry brush which has not yet been sullied. This Citadel dry will do. And just fold over, create a clean surface, and find some dark sand. Now, this will be our final highlight for the dirt. Come on. We won't need much of this, only a little bit. So just on the brush and prepare it as a dry brush. Okay, and then just gently run it over the dirt. Like, you want to catch the highest points and leave the rest. So just slowly work it in there. Just a light touch. Drag it across, don't stab it down. And we are almost done. Just got the rocks to go and that's it. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So just quickly finish off these chaps. Come on. Okay, and we're done. So, final stage. We'll find our colours. Typically, I use, just painting the rocks, so German grey. Where is it? It's medium sea grey, I believe. Green grey. Oh, that'll do. Green grey and maybe not. Well, there's sky grey, which will be our final highlight. And I need more paint racks. That's more kind of like brown right there. Neutral grey, that's what we're after. So I'll throw you back in the box. To start with, we'll do our undercoat of German grey. Just throw it over the rocks, no big deal. This guy doesn't have any. Okay. Let those dry and we'll come back and we'll do our first layer of overbrushing. Alright, so the initial undercoat is dry now, so let's do our mid-tone. I'm going to be a bit rough with this. So the colour we're using is neutral grey. So we'll get it on the brush, but also make sure the brush is heavily wiped down. So, done that. Now, just tap it onto the rocks until it's mostly covering it. And again, be sparing with it. That's what it should look like once you're done. Again, that guy doesn't have rocks. Okay, so it's already starting to look good, and we've got one final highlight layer to go. So, I should have taken those out. Find another dry brush. In my stash. Somewhere. I've had a small Citadel one for this purpose. This'll do. Some absolutely ruined base brush. Just fold it again to get a dry surface. And then, come on, there we go. Make our brush suitable as a dry brush. And now all you need to do is just lightly drag it over the top of the rocks. Okay, it should pick up the colour. Yep, we're done. So, that is all, well, actually no, not strictly true. One finishing touch I usually do for the bases is I rim them with black. It's just a stylistic choice. Some people prefer to paint them the same dirt colour as the terrain, but this is what I've always done and what I choose to continue to do. Sorry about seeing a glimpse of my arm. Just get some paint on the brush and just quickly rim. That sounds dirty, but yeah. And just be careful not to go too far up and get it up onto the dirt. It'll ruin all of your hard work. And there, that's one. Two. In a minute. Three. And 4. So it's pretty much dry already, and we're ready to move on to the next stage, well, the very final stage, which is flocking. So I'll just get cleaned up and prepared for that and be back shortly. Alright, so very final stage. Just got our main flocking materials prepared. So what I usually do first is just dab a few spots of PVA glue on the base. Ideally make them a bit patchwork and irregular. And then you simply cover up the flock. Sorry about that, tap it clear. Then we have a mostly based miniature, but I prefer to add some finishing touches in terms of bushes. So we've got some small bits of railway flock, which I'm just going to quickly dab in some glue and then just lay down on my base. And hope it sticks. We'll get another small bit there. Yep, and put it there. Where's a toothpick when you need it? Right there. So we'll just get a little bit more glue and chuck it there. Okay, so ignoring the fact that it's not quite dry yet, that's what our miniature will look like when we're done. So I'll go ahead and finish the rest of these guys off, and then we'll head into final review. I'm just going to move this over here. Careful. There we go. And lucky last, our British tank crewman. Come on, get on the base. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to let those dry, and then we'll go into review. So here we have the finished product. So yeah, that's generally what they should look like on the tabletop, and they certainly look a lot more impressive when you've got an entire formation lined up and ready to go. So yeah, it's getting late now, and that's the entirety of the work. So next up, I'll stitch this together into a video and see if I can make it work. Oh yeah, but in the meantime, thanks for watching if you've made it this far. I genuinely hope that this has been useful to you in your own projects, and I honestly don't care if you like or subscribe, because it's not as if I'm chasing numbers anymore. and doing this more for my own creative fulfillment. So yeah, take it easy, anybody who's still there, and I'll catch you on the next video.